So let's start from the beginning. How did this project begin? What made you decide you wanted to do it?
So on the 7th of October, being a documentary filmmaker, I asked myself where and how should I contribute and where should I be? Where should I be? Well, I wanted to be as close as possible to where things were happening. And it was impossible. It became a closed military zone. There were still battles going on and terrorists all over the south of Israel. I know personally the IDF spokesperson for the last few years, and I texted him directly saying that I know he's giving priority to journalists and press and news, but documentary films, although coming out the last, will be part of history. This is exactly what I wrote him. And so 2 days later, I was accompanied by a commander unit to the site of the Nova massacre, and I was one of the first ones to be there. And this was already with the help of the Israeli channel Hot 8, which is the documentary channel, and Sipul Studios, with, which joined from the very beginning. And well, nothing prepared me to what I've seen there on the site. It was the complete site of a massacre. I mean, everything was still untouched, and you could see parts of bodies. The smell was horrific, and the scale of what I've seen was enormous. I mean, it was a big festival. 4,000 people came, or 3,500. There is a debate of how many were there. And the scale of the attack was enormous. You could see it on the ground.
Did you have free access to capture all the footage you wanted when you got there?
Yes, definitely. Well, it was a little bit dangerous, but I really didn't think about myself or my cameraman. We were so keen to capture as much as possible. We knew that there is going to be a point in which they will tell us to leave the area,
Mhm.
but eventually we spent there 2 days. So back and forth. I mean, we had to go back in the night and come back in the morning. And there was a point in which we didn't even feel that we need the army accompanying us. So we went away, which wasn't wise, but this is what I do, when I'm on the ground as a filmmaker, I don't think about myself. Don't tell my mother, but
I will never.
yes,
She'll never watch this. Sorry, Mom.
yes, exactly.
What also makes the film obviously so compelling is the first person footage, the social media accounts. How did you begin to get access to those, and what made you decide that that was going to form the narrative that you were going to put together?
So it was very apparent from the very early stage of this attack that Hamas is uploading their material on Telegram, which was ahead of the news because Israeli news channels could not really report what's going on in the south because there was a lot of misunderstanding and they didn't want to frighten families and deliver news that is not affirmative. While on Telegram you could see everything. So I
Horrible.
had a technical team already on the first day that was gathering the footage that was uploaded from Hamas on Telegram mainly. And at the same time, me and other researchers working with me were collecting footage from survivors because survivors were uploading material to social networks. So mainly on TikTok and Instagram. This is their generation, they
Right.
rarely use Facebook. Um, so we were collecting a lot of videos from these social networks without knowing the people behind those videos. And this is what gave us the link to start following who are the people behind those videos. And the other process, which took us much more time, was, as I told you yesterday, was to get our hands on the GoPro cameras that were collected from terrorists that were captured by the IDF and the police. This was the precious thing. This was unreachable. This was something that the Israeli police didn't want to give us access to. So we were struggling really to get it from, unconventional sources. I would say people that really wanted to help us from the inside without getting permission. And so, like journalists are getting material when they need to. That
Right.
was the way we did it.
It was, I think it's because it all adds up to telling such a complete story, and it really gives us this you were there feel. I mean, that is that documentary that you're, trying to do. And we, talked about yesterday. It's not political. It's just, it's bearing witness. It's showing exactly something that happened. How did you go about
Just,
approaching?
just if I may, from the very beginning, and that was mind-blowing, from the very beginning, Israel still didn't invade Gaza for weeks. There were, of course, um, calling to go into war, and it was apparent that Israel is going to war with Hamas, and it was very clear. But already back then, a lot of people around the world were denying the terror attack, were denying the fact that it happened, were denying the stories that the survivors were telling. So my goal was, if that is the truth, then I need a lot of material to be able to show the truth and
Mhm.
the truth from both angles. So
Right.
it's not only the survivors, but also Hamas to be able to show it as an evidence. This is true. Look at it. I'm not touching it. I'm just placing it in front of you for you to judge by yourself if this is not what happened on that day.
Why do you think people were denying it?
The sentiment around the world on that specific day and the days after were somehow accusing Israel for what Hamas did on that day, which was something I just couldn't understand till this day, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, there is a conflict going on. It's complicated. It's 100 years conflict. There are so many nuances and complexities to this conflict. Do you really agree with acts of terror being done to people, harmless people, children, women, men, sexual crimes? This is what you mean in legitimate fighting?
Mhm.
That is not legitimate in my eyes. And most of us in Israel, including me, I'm a major in the Israeli army, in the reserves, of course. We're all obliged to serve the army. We all were part of the army. You are not trained to target harmless people. Of course, there is in war collateral damage. Of course, there are innocent people being uh, um, victims of the big attack, but this is not the target of the attack. You do not target people that raise their hands like you see in the film and shoot them.
Right.
That is exactly what I see as terror.
And I think that's exactly the point of the film is that just looking at it, you just have to look at it as an isolated event. This is the event, look, for the context of what it was, this is what happened on that day. And that seems very much the message of the film. Giving the survivors their voice and letting their narrative drive the story. You really see it through their eyes. There are a bunch of kids, they're high, they're going to a festival. We were all 20 once. We all did that. We all had a great time. And I think the way that you set the story coming back of, setting it from the beginning of like, hey, we're 20, we're going to this party, we're going to have a great time. We're on this emotional journey with them, and then it takes this horrible turn.
Exactly. That was the purpose. And to humanize those people. Because when you get the story from the news, when you hear it over and over again, when you see reporters talking about it, you don't understand the humanity behind the stories, the human beings, their emotional situation, their stories, their background. This is, I think, the role of documentaries. I mean, this is where I come after the news. This is what I bring as something more to the big story that was already told, because everything was told. But how do I bring something more complicated to this, more layers? It's the humanity, it's the human story.
And how did you go about then approaching the survivors? So you found their footage on socials. How did you then go back to approach them to say, because I imagine obviously it's, they're in a tough place emotionally to get them to then trust you to tell their stories.
So we collected information in a database of hundreds of survivors. Um, the main task was to understand how do we create a multi-angle story. So we have uh, so people will understand the capacity, the scale of this attack. I wanted as many as possible uh, different angles of the same story. So if someone is in the bar hiding in the fridge, there is another person at the same time in a shelter, and another person in an army base, and another person running. So we collected all these stories, and then we asked ourselves who has also the visual material to support his story. That was another thing. And then I met many of them, understanding who's capable mentally to stand in front of the camera, share his story. He's articulate. He has the persona, the charisma. It was like a process of casting, I would say. So we were like a lot of meetings talking who will be good for the film, who is capable of doing it, who is capable of being in the studio for 2.5 hours sharing his story. And of course, I had a psychologist on the set to meet the survivors just after the interview, to have a conversation with them, to see that everything is being under control. And then we invited them, some of them, to the editing room to see that everything is according to what they um, shared with us, that we're not manipulating their story. And and eventually we invited them to see a rough cut of the film together with friends and family in a more intimate environment, so they will not encounter the film when it comes up on the air or in the premiere screening.
Mhm.
It will be something that they um, experience intimately, which was one of the hardest screenings I've ever had in my life. I
I'm
mean,
sure.
they were crying from beginning to the end, but they truly gave me the support, the power to continue. I mean, they trusted me and at the same time encouraged me to to continue with the film and gave me the support that I was looking for, which was amazing. And I'm in touch with most of them till this day.
I mean, that was one of the things that struck me, hearing them tell their stories. Again, they're so young, but so brave, but also so selfless. To think about what they were going through in those moments and how they all took care of each other, they took care of strangers, how they thought about, they literally all thought that they were going to die. I mean, it's not, it's not an overstatement to say that if, you know, given the emotional journey they were on, but yet they all really thought about, okay, how are we gonna help each other? The film really captured all of that in a very powerful way.
That was the purpose. I mean, it's not only the attack and the terror, it's also um, the bravery and the solidarity and uh, bringing those heroes to the screen, the ones that are alive and the ones that are not with us. It's giving them the stage to tell their story, but also to bring all the qualities that you mentioned. Sure.
And surely what is, clearly, obviously the worst day of their lives. But also, I think you did such a, what was interesting too is without being overly dramatic about it, the certain reveals, the reunion, when we learn that, she's had surgery and she's in a wheelchair, it kind of gives you this, you realize the stakes of, what they've been through and what they're still going through and what their emotional journey continues to be. And then I think it's a little bit of what we talked about yesterday too, about how this is a changing narrative. Like, could you have imagined when you filmed this, here we are, over a year later, and people are still being held hostage?
That that is the most difficult thing in creating this film. The fact that there are still hostages, and most of the survivors are telling me that their story is still ongoing, that they cannot leave it behind because their friends are still in Gaza, that for them, as long as the war is going on, as long as the hostages are being held in Gaza, then it's an ongoing story. They still didn't put it in behind. I mean, that is something that I feel with them ongoing. I still cannot say goodbye to this film um, if I present it in the right words. It is a still ongoing process, and I wish for the hostages to come back home, really.
The film kind of leaves open-ended the question about what happened with the police and the army, why they didn't respond. Do you have a better sense, or I'm guessing it was intentional that you left that question open?
Clearly, because the Israeli government is not appointing an investigative committee to answer those questions. So we are relying on pieces of information that comes out from different sources in Israel in the different websites and channels and news programs, but nothing is coherent. Nothing is coming and giving us the full scale picture of understanding what exactly happened there minute by minute. How come it happened, and how come they were left for 6 hours with no one to help them? Um, this is a big, this film raises a lot of questions, and it is a big, how would you say, ktav ashma. It's like it's against the state of Israel as well. I mean, a lot of Israelis see this film and feel um, that it's also going internal. I mean, asking ourselves and our country what happened on that day. It's also criticizing the Israeli army, the Israeli police, the Israeli government on that specific day. It's not a comfortable film for Israelis. When someone is accusing me for propaganda, I'm telling him, oh, believe me, no one in the Israeli government nowadays wants to watch this film and will not watch this film. I mean, for them, it is something they don't want to remember. They don't want to confront themselves. They still didn't appoint an investigative committee. That's a shocking thing.
I mean, it's one thing, the failure of intelligence. It's another thing, fine, okay, that happened. It's another thing to hear these kids calling for help and the police either not responsive, not believing them, or not understanding the scope of what was happening. I mean, that's got to be the most horrifying feeling to think, oh God, I finally got help, and the help is not coming, not help is not on the way.
And I think the most significant thing is being said by Lali, that she felt that the state of Israel was conquered.
Right.
That's it. There is no Israel. That is the hardest thing, I think, for every Israeli that is watching this film, to hear and to feel.
Um, what do you want people to take away from this film? What do you want the message to be? What do you hope people will get from it?
On the human level, I think it's to understand what happened on that day, and what were the consequences to the people that went into were victims of this violence. And also, as I said last night, I do differentiate between Palestinian people. I don't think that every Palestinian wishes to kill every person that he would encounter on the land of Israel. I'm sure it's not the case. I'm sure we have brothers and sisters in Palestine that are willing to live with us peacefully. But Hamas is part of a bigger thing. It's part of a network that comes from Iran and also gets to Hezbollah. And this is, as they are shouting, as I insisted translating the words, just to understand that they are shouting jihad. it wasn't only against Israel, it was against Western values. There was one character that I insisted in adding before I finished the film, and it's the character that is gay and describing what would have happened to him if he would have been caught.
Mhm.
And he says that he was so frightened that they will see his phone and see him without clothes and understand that he's gay. I'm gay. I know how frightened gay men are in Gaza.
Mhm.
Hamas is deliberately looking for them, throwing them from rooftops. Uh, these stories are known. To hear people like Queers for Palestine praising Hamas is something that I cannot understand. I mean, I'm willing to understand many things. This is something I cannot understand. Hamas is against Western values, liberal democracy, freedom of speech, everything. And I think it's a war that we need to not specifically, I mean, I don't want this war to continue. I mean, in the bigger level, it is something that we want our world not to have. I mean, um, forces like Hamas.
We talked about this a little bit last night too, that some of the images that were included that, someone being shot when they're already lying on the ground. I was thinking too about the image of Shani where it's clear that she's been brutalized. Did you have any qualms about including those kinds of images, or were including those images important to you to make exactly the points that you're talking about?
I was between me and the producers, the executive producers that I was fortunate to work with, like Susan and others. I was the one who insisted in showing more, not blurring the images, and be able to show our audience exactly what happened on that day. As brutal as it gets, sometimes you need to understand the reality you live in and to identify with what the victims had to go through. Um, of course, eventually I had to compromise and to blur and to some images to take off. But I know that most of the executive producers understood that this film also should have those horrific images inside so people will understand.
It really brings it to light, unfortunately, and makes you understand the reality of the situation. We talked too about the scene inside the bunker where he was throwing out the grenades, and it's one of those stories. I don't know why it has gained some sort of so much traction here, because you just sort of think about this image of someone throwing out grenade after grenade after grenade, and we know how that story ends. But the video that really captures it, I don't even know how you got that footage, but from inside and outside, it really drives that point home for sure. What's next for you as a filmmaker? Are you going to continue following the story?
Um, I'm very interested in the story of the hostages. So this is something that keeps me ongoing. I mean, there is something that I'm doing in process. But at the same time, I'm also taking some distance because it was a tough year for me, for the crew that worked with me. It was tough working on a daily basis, looking at the images, um, living it all over and over again. I mean, today I'm not entering the film anymore. I'm not watching it anymore. I'm trying to avoid the images that come from this day of the 7th of October. Um, yeah, I'm trying to also to protect myself. Um, yeah,
As you should. All right.
yes.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank
great
you,
to
Deborah.
talk to you, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much. It's an honor. Really, thank you for what you did and for the fact that you joined us. Thank you so much.
Of course.